Isabella Hart stood in front of her bedroom mirror, her heart pounding as she stared at her reflection. The wedding dress she wore was stunning, pure white satin with delicate lace trim and shimmering pearls. But as beautiful as it was, it felt like a prison. In just a few hours, she was supposed to marry a man she didn't love, someone her parents had chosen for her to secure their business interests. She couldn't do it. With shaky hands, Isabella tore off the veil, letting it fall to the floor as she paced her room. She had begged her parents to reconsider, but they hadn't listened. This marriage would secure their family's fortune, and in their eyes, that was all that mattered. But what about love? What about her dreams? She didn't want to live her life trapped in a loveless marriage for the sake of money. Her heart raced as she looked at the clock. Time was running out. The ceremony was just hours away, and the guests were already arriving. She had to make a decision, now. With a sudden burst of determination, Isabella grabbed a bag she had hidden earlier. Inside were a pair of jeans, a hoodie, and a simple wig, a disguise that she had hoped she wouldn't have to use. But now, there was no other choice. She quickly changed out of the wedding gown, stuffing it into the closet. Her long, dark hair was tucked under the wig, and with a few quick strokes of makeup, she transformed herself into someone unrecognizable. She looked at herself one last time in the mirror, taking a deep breath. "I can't let them control my life anymore," she whispered to herself, feeling a surge of defiance. With her heart pounding in her chest, Isabella quietly slipped out of her room, sneaking past the servants and down the back staircase. She knew the estate like the back of her hand, and she expertly avoided anyone who might recognize her. Her escape plan was risky, but it was her only chance. Once outside, she made her way to a hidden side gate. Freedom was just beyond those iron bars, and with one last glance behind her, she pushed it open and stepped into the unknown. Isabella ran through the darkened streets, her breath coming in short gasps. The cool night air was a sharp contrast to the stifling atmosphere of her family's estate. She didn't know where she was going, but anywhere was better than where she had come from. She pulled the hood of her hoodie tighter over her head, hoping no one would recognize her. She had no plan, no idea of what the future held, but she couldn't go back, not now. After what felt like hours, Isabella found herself in the bustling heart of the city. The noise of cars and the chatter of pedestrians filled the air, and for the first time that night, she felt a strange sense of relief. In the chaos of the city, she could disappear. No one would know who she was, and that's exactly what she needed. As she wandered aimlessly through the streets, her eyes caught the soft glow of a small cafe on the corner. She hadn't eaten anything all day, and her stomach growled in protest. Deciding to take a break, she stepped inside, grateful for the warmth. The cafe was nearly empty, save for a few customers quietly sipping coffee. Isabella found a table in the back and sat down, hoping to blend into the background. She pulled her hood down, tucking her hair back under the wig. As she waited for the waitress to come by, she glanced around the cafe. That's when her eyes met his. Sitting by the window was a man, tall, strikingly handsome, with an air of authority that made him stand out from the rest of the crowd. He had dark, tousled hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to look right through her. For a moment, she felt a jolt of something she couldn't quite explain. He was staring at her. Isabella quickly averted her gaze, her heart pounding. Why was he looking at her? Had he recognized her? She doubted it. No one could know who she was, not in this disguise. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. Sebastian Grant, CEO of Grant Enterprises, had stepped into the cafe for a moment of quiet before an important meeting. His life was always filled with high-stakes deals and corporate negotiations, and moments like these were rare. But tonight, something, or rather someone, had caught his attention. When she had walked into the cafe, he had barely noticed her at first. She was dressed simply, in a hoodie and jeans, but there was something about her that drew his eye. Her face, though partially hidden under the hood, was undeniably beautiful. Her eyes, even from a distance, seemed filled with a mixture of fear and determination. He couldn't look away. Sebastian wasn't the type to be easily distracted, but this woman intrigued him. There was something about her that felt different. She didn't belong in this cafe, dressed as she was. He could sense it. She had an air of elegance, even though she was trying to hide it. Without thinking, he stood up and walked toward her table. Isabella's heart nearly stopped as she saw him approach. He was coming straight for her, and she had no idea why. Her pulse quickened, and for a split second, she considered bolting out the door. But before she could move, he was standing in front of her. "Mind if I sit here?" His voice was deep, smooth, and commanding. Isabella hesitated. She wasn't sure why, but something about him made her want to say yes. Sure," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. Sebastian sat down across from her, his gaze never leaving hers. "You seem out of place here." Isabella's breath caught in her throat. Did he know? Had he seen through her disguise? I'm just passing through," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Interesting," he said, his lips curving into a small smile. "Because you don't look like someone who's just passing through. You look like you're running from something." Isabella's heart pounded in her chest. How could he know? She had been so careful, so cautious. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, trying to sound nonchalant. But Sebastian wasn't buying it. "Don't worry," he said, leaning back in his chair. "I'm not here to pry, just curious." Isabella relaxed slightly, though her nerves were still on edge. "Why are you talking to me?" Sebastian smiled again, this time more genuinely. "Because you caught my eye, and I don't usually ignore things that intrigue me." Isabella felt a flush of heat rise to her cheeks. She wasn't used to this kind of attention, especially not from someone as obviously wealthy and powerful as him. I should go," she said, standing up abruptly. But before she could leave, Sebastian reached out and gently touched her arm. "Wait." The contact sent a jolt of electricity through her, and for a moment, she froze. "I don't know what you're running from," he said softly, "but if you ever need help, I'm here." Isabella stared at him, her mind racing. Who was this man, and why was he offering to help her? Without another word, she turned and walked out of the cafe, her heart pounding in her chest. As Isabella hurried away from the cafe, her mind was in turmoil. The encounter with the mysterious man had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. There was something about him, his confidence, his presence, that lingered in her thoughts. But she couldn't afford to be distracted. She had escaped one trap and wasn't about to fall into another. Little did she know, Sebastian wasn't one to let things go easily. From the moment he had laid eyes on her, he had felt a strange pull, a connection he couldn't quite explain, and he wasn't about to let her disappear without finding out more. Back in his office, Sebastian called his assistant, giving orders to find out everything they could about the mysterious woman he had just met. He didn't know why, but something told him that she was hiding more than she was letting on, and he was determined to uncover the truth. Meanwhile, Isabella found a small, cheap motel where she could lay low for the night. She had no plan, no destination, just the burning need to stay hidden. But as she lay in the dark, her thoughts kept drifting back to the man from the cafe. Why had he offered to help her? And why did she feel this strange connection to him? As she drifted off to sleep, she couldn't help but wonder if her escape had only just begun, and if she had unknowingly stumbled into something far more complicated than she had ever imagined. The next morning, Isabella woke up in the tiny motel room with a sense of dread. The reality of her situation hit her like a freight train. She had escaped her wedding, but she had no plan for what came next. Her family would surely be searching for her, and she couldn't afford to let them find her. She spent the day walking the streets, trying to figure out her next move. Her disguise was holding up, but she knew it wouldn't last forever. With every passing minute, the weight of her decision became heavier. Meanwhile, Sebastian was growing more intrigued by the mysterious woman. His assistant had tried to find information about her, but it was as if she didn't exist. That only fueled his curiosity further. Who was she, and what was she running from? That evening, Isabella found herself wandering near a park, lost in thought. As she sat on a bench, staring at the sunset, she heard a familiar voice behind her. "I didn't expect to see you again so soon." Her heart skipped a beat. She turned to see Sebastian standing a few feet away, looking at her with that same intense gaze that had unsettled her the night before. I'm just passing through," she said quickly, her nerves on edge. Sebastian smiled, his eyes twinkling with amusement. "You said that yesterday, but I'm starting to think you're not just passing through. You're hiding." Isabella's throat tightened. She had been so careful, yet somehow this man could see right through her. "I'm not hiding," she lied, standing up from the bench. I need to be alone." Sebastian stepped closer, his voice soft and calm. "I'm not here to pressure you. I just want to help." Isabella shook her head, her emotions swirling. She didn't know why, but there was something about him that made her want to open up. But she couldn't. Not now. Not when everything was so fragile. "I don't need your help," she said, her voice firmer this time. Sebastian studied her for a moment before nodding. "Fair enough. But if you change your mind, you know where to find me." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Isabella feeling more confused than ever. Over the next few days, Isabella tried to stay under the radar, but she couldn't shake the encounter with Sebastian. He kept popping up in her thoughts, and no matter how hard she tried to focus on her escape, she found herself drawn to him. One evening, after another long day of wandering the city, Isabella found herself outside a high-end restaurant. She stood there for a moment, staring through the glass at the elegant diners inside. It reminded her of the life she had just left behind. Wealth, power, luxury. But now, it felt so far away. As she turned to leave, she saw a familiar figure walking toward the entrance. It was Sebastian. He hadn't noticed her yet, and for a moment, Isabella considered slipping away before he could see her. But something stopped her. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was the fact that he was the only person who had shown her kindness since she had run away. Before she could make up her mind, Sebastian looked up and spotted her. His eyes widened in surprise, and a smile spread across his face. "Twice in 1 week," he said, walking toward her. "I'm starting to think this is fate." Isabella blushed, feeling self-conscious. "I was just passing by." Sebastian chuckled. "You seem to do a lot of that." She couldn't help but smile at his teasing. There was something disarming about him, something that made her feel safe, even though she barely knew him. "Do you want to come inside?" he asked, gesturing toward the restaurant. "I was about to have dinner, but I'd much rather have some company." Isabella hesitated. She hadn't planned on staying, but the idea of sitting down for a proper meal, especially with someone like Sebastian, was tempting. "I shouldn't," she began, but he interrupted her. "Just one meal, no strings attached." She looked into his eyes and saw sincerity. Against her better judgment, she nodded. "Okay, one meal." Inside the restaurant, the atmosphere was warm and inviting. The soft lighting and the quiet hum of conversation made Isabella feel more relaxed than she had in days. Sebastian was charming, polite, and surprisingly easy to talk to. As they sat across from each other, their conversation flowed effortlessly. They talked about everything: life, dreams, and even regrets, but they both carefully avoided discussing their pasts. Isabella found herself laughing at his jokes and smiling more than she had in a long time. For a moment, she allowed herself to forget about her troubles, to forget that she was running from a life she no longer wanted. But as the night went on, Sebastian grew more curious about her. "You've been very careful not to tell me anything about yourself," he said, his tone light but probing. "Why is that?" Isabella tensed, her guard immediately going up. I just prefer not to talk about my past." Sebastian leaned back in his chair, studying her. "Fair enough, but I can't help but wonder, are you running from something?" Her heart skipped a beat. He was getting too close to the truth, and she wasn't ready to tell him. "Not yet." "I'm not running," she said softly, though even she wasn't convinced. Sebastian didn't push her further, but she could see the curiosity in his eyes. He wanted to know more, and part of her wanted to tell him, but she couldn't risk it. As they left the restaurant that night, Sebastian walked her to the street, where she hailed a cab. Before she got in, he gently took her hand. "If you ever want to talk," he said, his voice sincere, "I'm here." Isabella looked up at him, her heart pounding. There was something about him, something that made her feel safe, even though she barely knew him. But she wasn't ready to open up yet, not when her life was still so uncertain. She nodded, giving him a small smile before getting into the cab. As she drove away, she couldn't help but glance back at him, standing on the sidewalk, watching her leave. Over the next few days, Isabella found herself thinking about Sebastian more and more. She didn't want to admit it, but she was starting to feel something for him, something she hadn't felt in a long time. But she knew she couldn't let herself get too close. Her life was too complicated, and the last thing she needed was to drag someone else into her mess. Still, every time she thought about his kind smile and the way he had looked at her, she couldn't help but wonder, what if things were different? One afternoon, as she was sitting in a quiet park, lost in thought, her phone buzzed with a text message. She looked down and felt her stomach drop. It was from Sebastian. "I hope you're doing well. I'd love to see you again." Her heart raced as she read the message. Part of her wanted to ignore it, to continue hiding in the shadows. But another part of her, the part that was tired of running, wanted to see him again. After a few moments of hesitation, she typed a reply. "Okay, let's meet." The day of their meeting arrived, and Isabella felt a mixture of excitement and anxiety. She had agreed to see Sebastian again, knowing full well that the closer she got to him, the more dangerous it became for her. Her family was still out there, searching for her, and she didn't want to drag him into her mess. But something inside her couldn't stay away. Sebastian had chosen a quiet cafe tucked away in a corner of the city. When Isabella arrived, she saw him seated by the window, looking out at the street with a thoughtful expression. He hadn't seen her yet, and for a moment, she stood there, unsure of what to do. But then he looked up, and their eyes met. A slow smile spread across his face, and she couldn't help but smile back. He stood up as she approached, pulling out a chair for her. "I'm glad you came," Sebastian said, his voice warm. Isabella sat down, her heart still racing. "I wasn't sure if I should." He leaned forward slightly, his eyes searching hers. "I get the feeling you've got a lot going on, but I'm here, and I want to help if you'll let me." His words tugged at her heart, but she knew she couldn't reveal everything just yet. She took a deep breath and forced a smile. "I appreciate that. Really, I do." For the next hour, they talked over coffee, the conversation light but meaningful. Isabella felt a strange sense of comfort being with him, like she didn't have to pretend to be someone else, but she couldn't let her guard down completely. As they finished their drinks, Sebastian looked at her with a serious expression. "There's something I need to tell you." Her heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" "I don't know how to explain it, but from the moment I met you, I felt something. It's like I've known you for a long time, even though we've only just met. I can't explain it, but I think about you all the time." Isabella's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't expected him to be so direct, and for a moment, she didn't know how to respond. I don't know what to say," she stammered. "You don't have to say anything," he said softly, reaching across the table to take her hand. "I just wanted you to know how I feel. I don't want to pressure you into anything, but I want to be here for you, no matter what." Isabella looked down at their joined hands, her emotions swirling. She hadn't planned for this. She hadn't planned to fall for anyone, least of all a man like Sebastian. But here he was, offering her a chance at something real, something she hadn't had in a long time. But before she could respond, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out and felt her stomach drop. It was a message from her family, and the words sent a chill down her spine. "We know where you are. You can't run forever." Her heart pounded in her chest, and panic surged through her. She quickly stood up, pulling her hand away from Sebastian's. I have to go," she said, her voice shaky. Sebastian stood up, concern etched on his face. What's wrong? Did something happen? I can't explain right now, she said, backing away. I'm sorry, but I have to go. Before he could stop her, Isabella turned and rushed out of the cafe, her heart racing. She couldn't let her family find her. Not now, not when she was so close to starting over. But as she disappeared into the crowded streets, one thought lingered in her mind. She couldn't keep running forever. Isabella spent the next few days in hiding, moving from one place to another, always looking over her shoulder. Her family's message had shaken her to the core, and she knew they were closing in on her. She couldn't let them take her back to the life she had fled. But what choice did she have? Sebastian had tried to contact her several times, but she ignored his calls and messages. She couldn't drag him into her mess. It was too dangerous, and he deserved better than to be caught up in her family's twisted plans. But despite her best efforts, she couldn't stop thinking about him. His kindness, his sincerity, it had all left a mark on her heart. She wanted to see him again, to feel the warmth of his presence, but she knew it wasn't possible, not while she was still in danger. One evening, as she sat in a dingy motel room, her phone buzzed again. She expected it to be another message from her family, but when she checked the screen, her heart skipped a beat. It was Sebastian. I don't know what's going on, but I'm worried about you. Please, let me help. Isabella stared at the message, her emotions in turmoil. She wanted to tell him everything, to finally let him in on the truth. But could she trust him? Could she really risk dragging him into her dangerous world? She hesitated for a moment before typing a reply. Meet me at the park tomorrow. I'll explain everything. Her hands trembled as she hit send, and she knew that tomorrow would change everything. The next day, Isabella arrived at the park early, her heart pounding in her chest. She had made up her mind. She was going to tell Sebastian everything. She couldn't keep lying to him, not when he had been nothing but kind to her. As she waited, she replayed the events of the past few weeks in her mind. It had all started with her desperate decision to escape the arranged marriage her family had planned for her. She had disguised herself, run away, and ended up crossing paths with Sebastian. And now, here she was, ready to tell him the truth. Sebastian arrived a few minutes later, his expression one of relief when he saw her. He walked up to her, his eyes filled with concern. I'm glad you came, he said softly. I've been worried about you. Isabella nodded, her throat tight with emotion. There's something I need to tell you. The truth. I haven't been honest with you about who I am. Sebastian looked at her, his brow furrowed in confusion. What do you mean? Isabella took a deep breath, steadying herself. My name isn't just Isabella. I come from a powerful family, and they had arranged a marriage for me. I didn't want it, so I ran away. That's why I've been hiding. Sebastian's eyes widened in shock, but he remained silent, letting her continue. I've been living under a different name, trying to stay off their radar. But now, they've found me, and I don't know what to do. I didn't want to drag you into this, but I couldn't keep lying to you either. For a moment, there was silence between them as Sebastian processed everything she had just told him. Isabella braced herself for his reaction, unsure of what he would say. But instead of anger or disbelief, she saw only compassion in his eyes. I knew you were hiding something, he said softly, stepping closer, but I didn't care. I wanted to help you, no matter what it was. And that hasn't changed. Isabella felt tears welling up in her eyes, overwhelmed by his kindness. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I just didn't know if I could trust you. Sebastian reached out and gently cupped her face in his hands. You can trust me. Whatever happens, I'll be here for you. Isabella felt a weight lift off her shoulders. She had been running for so long, but now, for the first time, she felt like she wasn't alone. In the days that followed, Isabella and Sebastian grew closer, their bond deepening with each passing moment. Sebastian helped her make plans to evade her family's grasp, but they both knew it wouldn't be easy. Isabella's family was powerful, and they wouldn't stop until they found her. But with Sebastian by her side, she felt stronger, more capable of facing whatever challenges lay ahead. As they sat together one evening, watching the sunset, Sebastian took her hand in his and looked at her with a seriousness she hadn't seen before. "I don't care what your past is," he said softly. "All I care about is that we're together. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." Isabella smiled, her heart swelling with love for him. She had never expected to find someone like Sebastian, someone who accepted her for who she was and stood by her no matter what. For the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful for the future. Months passed, and Isabella's family eventually gave up their search. With Sebastian's support, she was able to start a new life, free from the control of her past. She no longer had to hide, no longer had to live in fear. She and Sebastian grew closer with each passing day, their love for each other deepening in ways she had never thought possible. He had fallen for her the moment he laid eyes on her, but it wasn't until they had faced the trials together that she truly understood just how much he meant to her. One evening, as they stood on a quiet balcony overlooking the city, Sebastian pulled her close and whispered in her ear, "I love you, Isabella." Tears welled up in her eyes as she looked into his. "I love you too." And in that moment, as they held each other under the stars, Isabella knew that she had finally found her home, not in a place, but in the arms of the man who had loved her through it all. The CEO had fallen in love with the runaway bride, and together, they had built a life filled with love, trust, and a future they would face hand in hand. As the months passed and Isabella's life with Sebastian blossomed into something beautiful, she couldn't help but think about the family she had left behind. Running away from the arranged marriage had been a desperate decision, and though she had found happiness with Sebastian, a part of her still felt unfinished. She hadn't confronted the family she once fled. One afternoon, as Isabella sat in Sebastian's arms, watching the warm sunlight filter through the window of their home, she voiced the concern that had been weighing on her heart. "I've been thinking about my family," she began, her voice soft yet heavy with emotion. "I know they've hurt me by trying to force that marriage, but they're still my family. I don't want this tension to last forever." Sebastian looked at her, his eyes filled with understanding. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Do you want to reach out to them?" Isabella nodded slowly, though uncertainty lingered in her expression. "I think so. I'm scared of how they'll react, but I want them to know I'm okay, and that I've found love, not in the way they expected, but in a way that makes me truly happy." Sebastian took her hand and gave it a reassuring squeeze. "If that's what you want, I'll be there with you, every step of the way." With newfound resolve, Isabella sent a letter to her family. In it, she explained her reasons for running away, how she had wanted to forge her own path, free from their expectations. She expressed her love for them and her hope that they could understand her decision. She also told them about Sebastian, the man she had fallen in love with, who had supported her through the darkest times. Days passed with no response, and Isabella's anxiety grew. Would they reject her again? Would they ever forgive her for defying their plans? Sebastian remained by her side, calming her fears, but the silence from her family weighed heavily on her heart. Finally, one evening, as Isabella and Sebastian were preparing dinner together, her phone buzzed with a message. She hesitated before picking it up, her heart pounding in her chest. When she saw who it was from, her breath caught. It was her mother. The message was simple but filled with emotion. "We want to see you. We miss you. Please come home." Tears welled in Isabella's eyes as she read the words. Her mother's message wasn't just an invitation. It was an olive branch, a sign that her family was willing to listen, to reconcile. Sebastian wrapped his arms around her from behind, reading the message over her shoulder. "It's a start," he whispered. Isabella nodded, wiping away her tears. "I think I'm ready to face them." A week later, Isabella and Sebastian traveled to her family's estate. She had prepared herself for the reunion, but nothing could have eased the nervousness that tightened her chest as they pulled up to the grand gates of the home she had once fled. Sebastian held her hand tightly, offering silent support as they walked up the steps. When the door opened, Isabella was greeted by the sight of her parents standing in the doorway. Her mother's eyes were filled with unshed tears, and her father's expression was one of sadness, but also relief. For a moment, no one spoke. Then her mother rushed forward, enveloping Isabella in a tight hug. "Oh, my sweet girl," her mother sobbed, holding her as if she would never let go. "We've missed you so much." Isabella returned the embrace, her own tears falling freely. "I missed you too, Mom. I'm sorry for everything." Her mother pulled back, shaking her head. "No, don't apologize. We're the ones who should be sorry. We tried to control your life, and in doing so, we pushed you away. But we understand now. We just want you to be happy." Isabella's father, who had remained silent until now, stepped forward, placing a hand on her shoulder. His voice was gruff, but filled with emotion. "I thought I was doing what was best for you. I see now that I was wrong. You've always been strong, Isabella, and I'm proud of the woman you've become." The weight that had pressed down on Isabella for so long lifted in that moment. She smiled through her tears, overwhelmed by the acceptance and love she had yearned for. "Thank you, Dad. It means everything to hear that." Her parents' gaze shifted to Sebastian, who stood quietly by Isabella's side. Her mother's eyes softened as she looked at him. "You must be Sebastian," she said warmly. "We've heard so much about you." Sebastian smiled and stepped forward, shaking her father's hand and embracing her mother. "It's an honor to meet you both. Isabella means the world to me." Her father gave him a long look, then nodded approvingly. "Take care of her, daughter." "I will, sir," Sebastian said with sincerity. The days that followed were filled with healing and reconciliation. Isabella spent time with her family, sharing stories about her new life, while her parents, in turn, shared their regrets and hopes for the future. They had finally come to understand that forcing her into a life she didn't want had been a mistake, and they were ready to move forward, accepting her choices and the man she loved. One evening, as Isabella sat in the garden with her parents and Sebastian, her father raised a glass, his voice filled with emotion. "To new beginnings." They all clinked their glasses, a sense of peace settling over them. Isabella looked at Sebastian, who gave her a smile filled with love and pride. She had fought for her independence, for her right to choose her own path, and in the end, she had found not only love, but also her family's acceptance. As the stars twinkled above them, Isabella realized that she had found her happy ending, not just in her love story with Sebastian, but in the reconciliation with her family. She had built the life she had always dreamed of, and now, with the people she loved most by her side, she knew that the future was brighter than ever. Her escape had led her to freedom, love, and the family she thought she had lost forever, and together, they embraced the future with open hearts. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed the story. Please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe for more delightful stories.